You are listening to the inaugural podcast of Village Square Live, but we will be here on however many time basis you want us to be here. We will be doing shows live. We will be doing some recorded. We are here for you. More of you and less of us means a good podcast. So when we finally do go live, you can call in with your comments or your whatever you want, suggestions, whatever you want to do. This show is for you. It's going to be commentary about politics, commentary about sporting events, cultural things. You name it, we'll talk about it. It will always be located right here from our world to yours. You can get in touch with us if you have any comments about what we do here, or if you have any suggestions as to how we can improve the podcast, feel free to get back in touch with us. No matter where you are, you're always going to be a star right here on podcasting with Village Square Live. Village Square Live, like I said before, we get the term village because the world is a global village, but more particularly, it comes from the Nigeria Village Square website where, as you know, 1 out of every 8 human beings, black persons on the planet Earth, is a Nigerian. Don't mean to brag, don't mean to boast, but what we do is we talk truth here. We like to bring it to you raw, and you digest it, disseminate it to someone else, and then bring them back to the podcast. We can discuss ad nauseum as to how you feel about the factoid that we just put out. Big K, you are the man that makes things go. I'd like to say, first and foremost, thank you to the creator for allowing me the opportunity to be one of the hosts of this podcast. This was an opportunity that was presented to me several weeks ago. I jumped right at it. I've known Big K for a while now, almost maybe 9 to 10 years.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah, and this is our first venture into the wonderful but wacky world of podcasting, internet radio. It's a beautiful thing. We can reach you no matter where you are. If you're sitting in a cubicle, if you're sitting at your home, if you're sitting on a bus listening to the podcast, listening to the archives, wherever we're going to have it, we can get to you from our world to your world. This is Village Square Live. We hope to brand it. We hope you like the brand. We hope you want to add something to it. Like I said, more of you and less of us means a good podcast. I met Big K through the auspices of www.nigeriavillagesquare.com back, I would say, 2004. My uncle taking a DNA test to be found at www.africanancestry.com, mitochondrial DNA, which is passed on from the mother to daughter untouched, and the Y chromosome passed on from father to son untouched. Well, lo and behold, his Y chromosome, the alleles, which are a perfect match up with the Yoruba ethnic group, which is found in southwestern Nigeria, western Nigeria, and parts of Benin and Togo, I do believe. Yeah. And so once I found that out, I began to hit Google, and whose website did I come up with? Immediately, first thing that came to mind, there it was, looking beautiful, NigeriaVillageSquare.com. And so I went onto the forum right there, and then I introduced myself, and then Big K got back to me and gave me the name Omowale Edifamo, I do believe. I never forgot. I got a memory like 12 elephants. I tell you people, nothing ever gets past me. And so from that day forward, we've been in touch, spotty at first, sporadically, secondly, and now we're practically talking on a weekly basis via text, via email, so forth and so on, because we're collaborating to bring something different to you. The ideal goal of this broadcast is to be broadcast terrestrially, and then not just that, on many platforms. However we can get it out to you, no matter where you are on the face of the earth, even if you're in outer space. We'll hope you're listening to Village Square Live. Big K is the man that makes things happen. He's the technical guru. He's the man that makes things happen. So first and foremost, I give thanks to him.
Thank you for that.
And then I give thanks to my creator because I have the golden throat, I think, that matches this podcast. And then tertiarily, this is going to be a short list, but a long list of people, but it's going to be short and sweet, petite, right to the point, because I know the following people who I'm going to mention, they're going to be listening to this podcast, Big K, because I've been telling them about it, and they've been interested in going to Nigeria themselves, but unfortunately those opportunities haven't presented themselves. I'd like to thank the following people. One of my mentors, Big K, John Jabwin.
Okay.
And gave me my training back in the day as his co-host for shows such as Diaspora Speaks Out, Good Morning Diaspora, and South Florida Speaks Out, on various shows, on various radio outlets here in sunny South Florida, such as WWNN AM in Boca Raton and WSRF AM in North Miami Beach, and most recently WPBR AM 1340 in Lake Worth, Florida, which is due north of where I am right now. That man, I am forever grateful to him, because he was the one who gave me my training. He told me the ins and outs, the outs and the ins of the radio business, and made me somewhat semi-qualified to be here with you today, Big K. Yeah, and he will most definitely, when this thing gets as big as I think it can get, as big as we both think it can get, when it filters back to him, he will be a listener. He'll be hooked just like everybody else. And secondarily, I got to thank Big K. There's people who are behind everybody's success. They're in the shadows, if you will. They're known as earth angels to me, man. When you're down and when you're out, they support you 100%. They keep you alive. Mm-hmm. My mother, Barbara Robinson Hughes, my sister, Dawn Robinson Godwin, they're in Ohio. They will be listening to this podcast. My uncles up there, too, as well, Alvin Jones and Butch Benford. They will be listening as well. Erica Smith, my cousin, she can't wait to hear this podcast. Out in Phoenix, Arizona, Michael Blanchard, Edwin Blanchard, Aunt Darnell Blanchard. They can't wait to hear it as well. The more people we can drive to the podcast, the better it is, because we do intend on getting some sponsorship and treating this very seriously. This is not just a, if you will, Big K, a hobby.
Absolutely.
No way. Also, who down here in Florida, mention a few names to you. Donna Sozio, Becky Hamilton Williams, I don't want to mess her name up, Debbie Dobin, Deb Corso, Deb Torgerson. They're going to be listening to it too, because they're waiting on bated breath to get in where they fit in with this podcast. Vanette Bernard, Vivine Collins. These were some of the people, Big K, when I was telling them about the podcast, they said, go for it. They got a big surprise on their hands. My people up in Washington, D.C., Fred Foster, Bill Abels, Rob Mance down here in Pompano Beach at the North Broward Health Center, Gerard Pilgrim, a son of the soil, Trinidad Tobago. He'll be listening. He's going to have his people listening down there too as well. Barry Alfred, another friend of mine from Tobago who helped me out. Mike Mossy, Bernard Kinney, Ken Drury, Ken Lockyer. So many people want to hear this podcast, Big K, because these are people who have mentioned to me over the years, I would love to go to Nigeria. I just don't know anybody there. Well, when we do the show live, when I finally get to go to Nigeria and do this podcast live somewhere, you will know me.
Absolutely.
Some other folks I'd like to thank who were behind me 100%. Jen Willette, Lita Olmos, Kathleen Higgins, and I want to not forget anybody, because there's been so many people, man, who've helped me. Marion Shan down in Miami, a girl who's a daughter of Jamaica. She says her people will be listening down in Kingston once we get this thing up and running. So many people I'd like to thank for being behind me and being patient, because once we get rolling with Village Square Live, this is going to be a global thing. It's not going to be confined to a Nigerian audience. Nope. No way. We want you to be listening out in the South Pacific, in the islands of Fiji, Marshall Islands, Solomon Islands, the West Indies, wherever you are on the continent of Africa, even in Europe, right here in the United States. We want you to be listening. Carol Hayward, I haven't forgotten about you. I know you've been there for me. My cousin right here in Coral Springs, Constance Jones Samuels. They can't wait. They're like, where's this podcast? We want to hear this podcast. Well, it's coming, folks. It's coming. This is Village Square Live, the inaugural show. for you. I just wanted to make sure I mentioned all the people who have helped me out. Eric William, a big University of Florida fan and alum. I haven't forgot about you. Mark Noble, Derek Lewis, Duran Tross. I've told a bunch of people about this podcast, man, and they've been waiting with bated breath, Big K, because they want to know, it's Big K, and what does he got to do with anything? Big K is the man that makes things happen.
Now you know.
If you don't know, now you know, quoting the late Biggie Smalls. That's right. Yeah, and you know something, like I said, we need ears and minds and hearts. So no matter where you are, like I said, you're a superstar. So yes, most definitely, this podcast, we want it to be everywhere and anywhere. We want this podcast to be the most listened to program globally anywhere. Now, you got to crawl before you can walk. And I know we're crawling right now. We're crawling for sure. But you know something? We're going to crawl into your hearts. And then later on, we're going to crawl into your wallets too, because we're going to need some we're going to need some sponsors.
For real.
This thing is getting ready to go viral. I do believe it will go viral. And yes, we first and foremost, I want people to know, especially our Black American family, large amounts of you, whether you know it or not, you do have Yoruba ancestry and Igbo ancestry. All you have to do is take that DNA test. I'm not plugging them, but it's there. AfricanAncestry.com. And then historically, if you go back past 1800, if you will, go past the War of 1812, if you're able to do that, 18th century, 17th century, at that time, if you know the history of the American 13 colonies, especially the Tidewater area of Virginia, some of the first enslaved Africans who were there would be considered modern-day Nigerians, because the first six presidents of the United States, I would say George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and James Monroe, they owned slaves. Well, part of their slave roster, if you will, some of the people they owned were Igbos from Biafra. So the history of Nigerian people in these continental United States goes way back before, the modern day guys you see playing in the NFL, or, the people who live out in Houston, Texas, we like to call Nigeria West, or, it goes way back. So, some people who are popular, who do have Nigerian ancestry, if you will, case in point, the Bishop T.D. Jakes, he took the test at AfricanAncestry.com. He has Igbo ancestry. Jim Brown, a man who was born in lower part of Georgia but raised on Long Island, he said that his grandparents and his great-grandparents used to tell him that he had Igbo ancestry. So forth and so on. So if you dig deep, ladies and gentlemen, if you go back on your branch of your tree, your family roots, your family tree, if you shake those trees hard enough, shake those branches hard enough, indeed, a Nigerian will fall out of it. So,
one thing I do know is, in all the, statistics that I've seen,
yes,
it is known that most of the slaves in that time were taken from what is now known as Nigeria.
Right.
That area, what they call the Bight of Biafra.
Yes.
That is where most of the slaves were taken from in Africa. So I think you might be right on that one. Go on.
Oh, yeah. And yes, and then we also cannot forget the slave ports, the slave markets at Calabar and Badagry.
Right.
From those two ports alone, tens of thousands of people were dispersed, never to see their families ever again. And they were dispersed to places like Cuba, Northeast Brazil, Barbados, Jamaica, and of course the continental U.S. So if you, like I say, people, somewhere along the line, somewhere in your family tree, you do have a Nigerian somewhere. You just got to go deep, and you got to go beyond the 1870 census here in the United States, because that's the first time they started enumerating black people. Yes, right. In 1870. You have to go back to the people who owned your families, the slave logs that they kept. They kept the logs along with the livestock. The livestock and the slaves were kept enumerated in the same pages. So that's where you have to begin. And this is a big if they even kept the ethnicity of the slave, because a lot of times, they weren't interested in that. They just, would get a person over here, change the name immediately, and then bring them to work right away, not caring about the background or the past, and then prevented them from playing drums, prevented them from, using their own names and speaking their own language and so forth and so on. But I'm here to tell you, Big K, and everybody else who's listening, there is a town, there's two towns in the state of Georgia. One is called Ebo Landing, and the other one is called Ebo Town. All you got to do is just go up and down I-95 to any one of the Sea Islands and ask somebody where it is. They will direct you to it. Once again, you're listening to the inaugural podcast, if you will, of Village Square Live with your host, Steve Robinson, and Big K, the man from NigeriaVillageSquare.com.
And speaking of towns, there's a town called Africa Town. This one is in Mobile,
yes,
Alabama.
Yes.
And there's a very interesting book about that. And if anyone wants to understand the story, read that book. It's by somebody, I think it's called Clotilde. I can't remember the exact.
Yes, exactly. Because that person, the last slave ship ever to disembark in the continental United States was named Clotilde, if I do recall. It let go in Mobile, did it not?
Yep.
Yeah, and the last persons they let go who disembarked were enslaved Africans from the Gold Coast, which they called it then, which is now called the modern-day Ghana.
Ghana, right.
Yeah, the last person to get off that ship was a man by the name of Cujo.
Yep.
His name is Cujo Lewis. His name was changed to Cujo Lewis, but his ancestors still live right there in Baldwin County, Alabama, and still right there in Mobile.
And if you read that book, which I read, if you read that story, the guy Cujo came from a place called Takwa.
Yes.
And Takwa land is is between Benin Republic and present-day Nigeria, somewhere around there.
Oh, okay. Now, see, I didn't know that. I got an education.
Right.
Yeah.
But his recollection was thinking Takwa was in Gold Coast,
Right. There was a man by the name of Olada Ekiano who wrote a book on his adventures he was in Igbo, I do believe. He and his sister were abducted at the village.
Right.
And he first wound up it took him 3 months to get to the sea. Whatever slave port he arrived in, it took him 3 months to get there. Then from there, it took him another maybe 60 days to get to Grenada, the Republic of Grenada. And then from there, his owner took him to London. And then he, of course, from that point on, he got his freedom. And so,
did he go back to Africa?
They say that he did, but I don't see any evidence to suggest otherwise that he got there. I thought he remained in England for the remainder of his life, but I don't know.
Okay.
No, I wish I knew. But his fascinating story.
Steve, something I'm interested in to learn from you is how folks can do this DNA testing. But before we go into that, let's take a short break and play some music.
Okay. That sounds like one to me, folks. Stay tuned. Don't you go anywhere. This is the inaugural broadcast of Village Square Live. Come back, won't you?
And the music is from Sonny Hade.
Ọpẹ́ mi lọ, ọpẹ́ mi bọ̀, ọpẹ́ ṣe bí ẹni ti kú. Ọpẹ́ òkú o, ẹ wo mọ̀ríwó ọpẹ́ o. Ọpẹ́ mi lọ, ọpẹ́ mi bọ̀, ọpẹ́ ṣe bí ẹni ti kú. Ọpẹ́ òkú o, ẹ wo mọ̀ríwó ọpẹ́ o. Ọpẹ́ òkú o, ẹ wo mọ̀ríwó ọpẹ́ lókè. Ọpẹ́ òkú o, ọpẹ́ òkú o, ẹ wo mọ̀ríwó ọpẹ́ o. Ọpẹ́ ro máa kú o, kó máa kú o, ẹ wo mọ̀ríwó ọpẹ́ lókè. Ọpẹ́ òkú o, ọpẹ́ òkú o, ẹ wo mọ̀ríwó ọpẹ́ o. Ọpẹ́ ro máa kú o, ẹ wo mọ̀ríwó ọpẹ́ lókè sẹ́. Ọpẹ́ òkú o, ẹ wí bọ́. Ọpẹ́ òkú o, kó má dẹ̀ tí kó má dẹ̀ dáríwó. Wọ́n ń gbéyàwó lọ òkè. Wọ́n ń gbéyàwó lọ òkè. Ó mọ̀ mí gbéyàwó wọn lọ. Ṣé ló ń ké? Wọ́n ń gbéyàwó lọ òkè. Ó mọ̀ mí gbéyàwó wọn. Ṣé ló ń ké? Wọ́n ń gbéyàwó wọn.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. No matter where you are, you're listening to the inaugural podcast of Village Square Live with your host, Steve Robinson, and the man who makes things happen, Big K. We were getting ready to talk about the DNA testing found at AfricanAncestry.com, but let me backtrack a little bit. There are several places in these United States that contain countless I don't know if you call them volumes, if you will, of DNA samples. The Mormons out west in the Utah area, they have a huge repository of DNA testing, if you will, Church of Latter-day Saints. But AfricanAncestry.com specifically, what they did was they went to the continent of Africa, I would say in the late 90s, early 2000s, and began doing the swabs in the inside of the cheeks of various ethnic groups, starting at Mauritania all the way down to the Cape of Good Hope and all the way back to the Horn of Africa. And they've collected samples of maybe, you'd have to verify this with them, but maybe close to 150 to 200 different ethnic groups. And so what they tried to do, the objective, the goal, if you will, was to see which African American, or for that matter, Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Latino, whomever, if you're black and in the West, or if you're black and in Europe, where your ancestor came from specifically. Now, the test can't tell you exactly how your ancestor arrived in the West, but what it does do is it identifies you with an ethnic group. Now, for a fact that black Americans, when they're doing genealogy, they can only go back, most of us cannot trace our family's past beyond the Civil War. 1870 census was the first time they enumerated us, and before that the Freedmen's Bureau began, after the war was over, began going from place to place enumerating people as best they could, but it was not enough. So with genealogy you have to do what's called anthrogenealogy, which is a growing field, and we're not the only people who are doing it. People are doing it all over the planet. Anthrogenealogy identifies for the genealogists, or the people who are trying to discover the roots, the exact ethnic group or tribe that your male or female ancestor may have come from. Now, keep in mind, you have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, 16 great-grandparents, so forth and so on. 10 generations back, you have 1,024 ancestors. But DNA, mitochondrial DNA, Y chromosome DNA remains untouched. Mitochondrial, from mother to daughter, so forth and so on. Y chromosome, father to son, father to son. That tells you exactly where you come from.
So which one is more accurate, the modern one or the father one?
I think both of them are.
Oh, okay.
But what it also tells you several stories. It also shows you how black people, once they were enslaved and taken from the villages and taken off the continent, how they were scattered to and fro and made to intermarry and detribalize. Once they were brought to places in the West, say for example a Yoruba man or a Hausa man or a Ashanti female, they could not marry a counterpart from their own ethnicity because they could not find one on the same plantation, and B, that was not permitted anyway, at least in the United States. So what it does is it shows you who you share your DNA with, and that is the one thing that they could not take away from our ancestors. They took away their dignity, took away their pride, took away their humanity, took away a bunch of things. They could not take away the DNA. Yes. So I think these tests are highly accurate. They're in the 90th percentile, and most people who have taken them have had beautiful results. It's primarily celebrities who have taken it, but it's also people who are like professionals who can, because the test itself each of them a piece is $350. So they may be cost prohibitive.
Now, you have done this yourself, right?
I've done the test myself, but it didn't trace my ancestry back to the continent. I took both tests. The Y chromosome for me went back to Portugal, of all places. Okay. But my DNA also suggests that it went to Portugal, but it matches my particular allele, which is a pattern of DNA. The alleles match people who live in the Maghreb of North Africa, and also in the Eastern Sahara, and in the middle, that place we call the Middle East. I call Northeast Africa, but it's geopolitically called the Middle East. So my particular allele, a lot of people share it along the Mediterranean side of Africa, and also on the northern part of the Mediterranean, Italy, Greece, so forth and so on. But it does not tell you the story. What it does tell you is that somewhere along the line, somebody from the Mediterranean had slept with an African ancestor of mine, probably a white male, and passed that Y chromosome on to me. Now, my mitochondrial DNA for sure goes to, the United Kingdom, because my grandmother told me a story of how a slave in her ancestral line was raped by her owner. And so that's how I got that mitochondrial DNA. So you have so many ancestors going, like I said, 10 generations back. You have 1,024 ancestors. So your DNA really comes from all over the earth, if you will. But it's so broken down that by the time it gets to you, is dispersed, and it's really not the same. But the father to son thing is unchanged, and the mother to daughter thing is unchanged. And when you, as a human being, take both tests, what it is you're finding out is that your Y chromosome comes from a certain line, and your mitochondrial DNA comes from a certain line. Now, the folks who live on the continent of Africa itself, more than likely, if you were to take this test, both mitochondrial and Y chromosome is going to go to the same ethnic group, unless you are the product of intermarriage of a different ethnic group.
All right. So, how did you then link up with the Yoruba?
What they did was they took the swab from my uncle, Robert Jones, whose facility I'm broadcasting from right now. We mailed it to Washington, D.C., to the people at Howard University who keep the repository, and then they, in association with the Ohio State University, Dr. Rick Kittles, they have some of the DNA samples from Africa there as well. They match it up. It takes a while. They go, they get the swab off the little white Q-tip or whatever, and they put it in a petri dish, and they do whatever they do, and they match it up as closely as possible with the nearest match. And the nearest match, under the microscope, was Yoruba.
Interesting.
Yes, most definitely. Then it lead me to, then more questions came up, because not too many Yoruba people found themselves on the continental United States. Not too many. Most of them, once they were abducted, were brought into the West Indies and into Latin America. Very few Yoruba made it to the continental U.S. But the flip side of that is, in the Biafra area, tens of thousands of Igbo were serendipitously, if you will, or just dumped into Tidewater area, Hampton, Newport News, Norfolk, in that area, and also and the slave markets in Charleston. For some strange reason, the Igbo people felt victimized to the slave trade more than any of the other ethnic groups in Nigeria. And I don't know historically why that it was the case, but it just happened to be the case.
So, is that where we have the Igbo landing?
Yes. Igbo landing is in Georgia. Igbo town is in Georgia. But Igbo people, if you go back to some of the newspapers from the, let's say, the 1700s and the 1600s in colonial North America, some of the runaway notices the runaway notices a man ran away from such and such a plantation. He's described as 5'6", with these particular scars on above the cheek, blah blah blah, and he comes from this particular nation, and they spelled it IBOE. Right. Because in that time period they used Old English. The English that we speak now in the United States is not the same as it was then in the 1640s and 1650s. So the runaway notices from colonial North America, particularly Maryland, Virginia, and the Carolinas, describe people from Madagascar, ethnic groups from Mozambique. It describes people from Angola, really all over. The African American is really unique in this sense that he can trace his ancestry almost to every single country on the continent of Africa, simply because the 13 colonies of the United States were not, I repeat, not the main entry point for the slave trade.
It's like secondary, right?
Yeah, it was tertiary, the third. Third. They got third dibs, because they're geographically further away than, let's say, the islands of the Caribbean. It took a slave ship leaving Ouida, which is a place in Benin, by the way. It took a slave ship 60 days to go from Ouida to Martinique or Guadeloupe or places like that. Just 60 days. Whereas the same trip from Ouida to, let's say, New Orleans would take maybe 3.5 months.
Now that you remind me of Ouida, that is where the guy from Africa Town, that's where it sailed from.
Okay. Ouida.
The Clotilde.
Yes. Yeah, yep. The door of no return.
Door of no return.
Yes, it's still there, and matter of fact, the Republic of Benin, the government has painted it. They have sculpture on it. They have, as a tourism site, Black Americans go there, people from the Caribbean go there to visit, so forth and so on. And it has a lot of association with fetishes, if you will. I hate to bring that up, but...
Yeah, it's true. There's a big one in Ghana as well.
Yeah.
Yep. Go on.
So, the 13 colonies of the United States became a dumping ground for enslaved Igbo people. And in the DNA of most Black Americans you'll see, if once they take these tests, that large majority of them either have Igbo ancestry or ancestry from Sierra Leone or Cameroon or Senegal or Guinea-Bissau, the Portuguese part of Guinea there, or Liberia. Case in point, Oprah Winfrey she took one of those tests as well. I forget which one, mitochondrial or Y, but it traced their ancestry to the Pele people of Liberia. African Americans, because the slave trade was not the main thrust for them, colonial masters here in these 13 colonies, they had to accept what they could get. So if a man was brought from Kenya or Mozambique or Angola or Gabon, they had no choice but to, purchase that individual. Yeah, exactly. So that makes the African American kind of different, because when you go to the islands of the Caribbean, particularly Antigua, Dominica, the Leeward, Windward Islands, the people there know exactly geographically where in Africa their ancestry is.
There's actually a major part of Brazil. It's called Salvador.
Yeah, Salvador de Bahia.
And a lot of the practices there, some of the languages and everything, is still very African influenced, especially very Yoruba.
Yes, yeah. And some of the dress that they have and some of the garb and the gear is very much so Yoruba oriented. Huge numbers of Yoruba people were brought into Brazil, into eastern Cuba, and into the Greater Antilles, Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, so forth, so on.
You won't believe the number of emails I get from Brazil. People wanting to know about the Nigerian, how to travel to Africa to go and learn about the Ifa and every other religious part of things. It's very interesting.
And it would seem to me, BK, that it would not take long for a plane to get from Salvador de Bahia to Lagos.
A lot of people, Christians, Muslims, they go to Jerusalem, they go to Mecca.
All right.
Why can't these guys come to Africa and just learn more about the culture? You know what I mean?
Are there direct flights now from Brazil to Nigeria?
Used to be. I'm not sure if they're still on now, but it used to be direct from Lagos to Rio, I believe.
Okay, and how long would a flight of that nature take?
You know, from here, Atlanta to Lagos takes about 10 hours. So
Okay.
I would assume it's about roughly around the same time frame, 10 hours or so.
I would say it might be a little less because Brazil is geographically closer to Nigeria than, let's say, the United States would be.
Yeah,
I think
you might be right here.
Yeah. Like, for example, I was told that if you could get a direct flight from Miami to Lagos, which is impossible and will never happen, but from Miami to Lagos, it'd be less than, let's say, Atlanta to Lagos, simply because Miami is at 25 degrees north of the equator. So, and then Brazil, because it juts out into the Atlantic Ocean as it does, it is, when you look on the globe, it's right there. It's like if you could put Brazil into the bite of Biafra, I think they would fit like a puzzle. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the inaugural podcast of Village Square Live. We're hoping you're enjoying it. This is, again, the inaugural edition. Things will grow from here. Mushrooms, skyrocket. We will blow up like an atomic bomb. We're going to be talking about all kinds of things. It just so happens that I'm giving you my bump-by-bump rundown of how I met Big K and how I became interested in Nigeria. As a matter of fact, I'm wearing my green and white right now as I'm sitting. I'm wearing it in tribute. Yes, sir. Oh, yes. As you should. You should be proud of the motherland, the homeland, Nigeria. You Nigerians who are listening to this podcast, please, by all means, bleed green and white. If you are, I want you to wear your green and white underwear, your green and white socks. Make sure you always, and I don't want to offend anybody from Ghana or Cameroon or Togo, but I love you all. We love you all, and we want you to listen to this podcast. But make sure, by all means, that you fly proudly that white and that green. Do it on behalf of Akabari. She did a hell of a show. And Miriam Anyali, the queen of the Nigerian sprints, the queen of African sprints. Make sure you big up these people and big up Sam Peter and and people like that, and Michael Olajide and all these people. There's so many Nigerians. We don't even have enough time.
At some point we should talk about the Nigerians doing sports in America. If you look at NFL today,
yes,
tons and tons of Africans, not just Nigerians, that are doing very well. NBA as well,
Yes, the starting safety for the Patriots, Igbo, he's Nigerian. I can't. The name escapes.
Quite a few of them, and I think we should have a specific show for that.
Oh yes, and we will. And you know what? And the people will call in and participate. Like I said before, more of you and less of us means a great podcast. And we like to thank you for listening to this inaugural edition. And pass it around to your people. Upload it to Facebook. Put it on your own personal Facebook pages. Upload it to your MySpace. Do people still use that? I don't even know. Upload it to wherever you can find a place in your heart and a place on the internet. Upload this podcast and pass it around. Word of mouth is a beautiful thing. And give us your suggestions. Big K, you got an email address for us again?
live@nigeriavillagesquare.com.
Once again, ladies and gentlemen, live@nigeriavillagesquare.com. You get back to us and we will get back to you. We will give back what we get. This is your podcast, and I'd like to say once again, thank you to some people who I might have left out. If I've left you out, I didn't want to do that. Karen Wolf, I know you're listening to this because you probably at one point in your life used to date a Nigerian, but maybe. And people
she needs to come and tell us about that.
No, stay away from those Nigerian guys. Oh man, there's so many people I'd like to thank. Thank everybody who stood behind me, because radio is my first love. Above and beyond some of the things I'm doing now, but some of the things I used to do, and I have a special place in my heart for Nigeria. Always will. That's the land of my ancestors. So Big K, I think once we're done with all these podcasts, no matter how many we do, by the time it's said and done, and it'll never be done because we're going on ad infinitum. Yep. We're going to convert everybody on Earth. And yes, and of course, interviews will be coming.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, definitely, most definitely. And we're going to interview people who you don't hear from too often. People who are behind the scenes, people who are the movers, the shakers, the jelly makers. We're going to interview these folks because I know you're tired of hearing about the same old people, the same old this and the same old that. There's some unsung heroes out here that you need to know about. Is that right, Big K?
Absolutely.
And I don't want to forget Deirdre Gross in Atlanta, Khalil Gross in Washington, D.C., Andrea Marks, my people in Atlanta right there. Thank you for listening to this podcast in advance. Thank you, Donna King in Orlando. I've forgotten about you, sweetie. Make sure you keep your eyes and ears to this podcast and tell all the Nigerians who live in Orlando, because I know there's some up there. Tell them about this podcast. The other folks who have helped me out, who have been in my corner. If it were not for you, there would be no me. And for all the people who I left out, if I can remember you on this next podcast, I will be sure to shout out your name. And until next time, until show number 2, be safe. This has been Village Square Live. Enjoy the music.
Mr. Follow, follow.
Follow, 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 follow.
Mr. Follow, follow.
Follow, 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 follow.
Some they follow, follow them, close them eye.
Close eye, ping, ping, ping.
Some they follow, follow them, close them mouth.
Close mouth, pa, pa, pa.
Some they follow, follow them, close them ear.
Close ear, boing, boing, boing.
Some they follow, follow them, close themselves.
Close hands, biri, biri.
Some they follow, follow them, close them eye.
Close eye, ping, ping, ping.
Some they follow, follow them, close them mouth.
Close mouth, pa, pa, pa.
Some they follow, follow them, close them ear.
Close ear, boing, boing, boing.
Some they follow, follow them, close themselves.
Close hands, biri, biri.
I say them closest. I say them closest. If you dey follow, follow, make you open eye, open mouth, open sense. If you dey follow, follow, make you open sense, open ear, open mouth. Now that time you know go fall. Now that time you know go fall. If you dey follow, follow them book.
Now inside compound you go quench.
If you dey follow, follow them book.
Now inside compound you go quench.
Cockroach day, the ratty day, the cold day, darkness day.
Now inside compound you go quench.
My brother make you know follow book. Oh. Look, come and go your way.
Follow,
If you dey follow, follow,
follow,
make you open eye.
follow,
If you dey follow, follow,
follow,
make you open sense.
follow,
If you dey follow, follow,
follow,
make you open eye. If you dey follow, follow, make you open sense. My brother make you not follow book. Oh. Look, come and use your sense. If you dey follow, follow, make you open eye. If you dey follow, follow, make you open mouth. Make you open